Perfect. Cool. Well, thanks again for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Feel free, Megan and Mark, to course correct me if you want to kind of get questions in, or however you'd like the presentation to go. But I can talk for a little bit. I thought I would give you a little bit of background on myself, then talk a little bit about what the company does to give you that perspective in the community. And then I kind of just put together some thoughts around, maybe the important lessons learned in working in philanthropy and kind of working at the center of both nonprofit organizations seeking resources and philanthropists and foundations and companies investing to make that change in the community, which hopefully will kind of open up, I think, the opportunity certainly to ask any questions you all have. And again, kind of feel free to put some things in chat if we have questions or would like to dig deeper on any particular subject. Happy to do that. So a little bit on my background. So I came to the Cincinnati region about 15 years ago. I left the job as the CEO of the Louisville Orchestra down in Louisville and came up here to Cincinnati to lead the fundraising and marketing for the then Fine Arts Fund, which is now called ArtsWave, that is really a fundraising and grant making organization that supports a lot of the arts and cultural organizations in this region. My early part of the career, real early part of my career, I was a classical musician, classically trained. The only degree I have is to play percussion. And in many ways, though it wouldn't necessarily look like that on paper, being a musician actually, I think, trained me a lot for, the creativity and just kind of strategy that's required to kind of work in the space that I am now. But that path always wasn't particularly clear. What I did, kind of how I got into the nonprofit work, was that I began working on the administration side of an orchestra at the Syracuse Symphony in their fundraising department after I was done playing as a musician, and just really kind of worked my way up through the orchestra world into management until being the executive director of the Louisville Orchestra. But then, the latter part of my career really was kind of continuing to expand, I would say, in the philanthropy space, starting at the then Fine Arts Fund, but then got recruited to be the CEO of the Arts and Science Council in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a similar kind of organization that supported a couple hundred cultural, history, and science organizations in that region. And the organization also, which you'll see the connection here in terms of what Ignite looks like, was both a grant making and fundraising organization. So it raised the dollars that it then granted out to various institutions, and was also the conduit for a lot of public funding in that region of North Carolina. But I met my now wife here in the Cincinnati region when I first moved here, and we really decided we wanted to come back. And I had also been working on some entrepreneurial ideas about starting a company that would really focus on philanthropy. And one thing that I was really good at and had a lot of experience at was fundraising. And so that was kind of where the company started. And it kind of evolved from there. But about 8 years ago, I moved back to Cincinnati. I quit my job at the Arts and Science Council when I signed a contract to raise the private dollars for the music hall renovation project. So that was kind of the big project that got the company started. And at the same time, I ran a $40 million campaign in Charlotte. And so kind of had two first clients that were major kind of community campaigns, which really kind of began the company that is now Ignite. Actually started the company and called it Lewis and Clark because so much of that work around raising dollars for major capital efforts was really an exploration. They were hiring somebody to figure out how to get there. There typically isn't a clear roadmap on how you, like Music Hall, how you raise $140 million from all kinds of different sources, and is often a puzzle piece that has to be kind of put together and has lots of fits and starts. And that was kind of the impetus for kind of the explorer connection to Lewis and Clark. But ultimately we merged with another company that was called Ignite Philanthropy Advisors that worked with private foundations, which became the Ignite Philanthropy that we are now, which I'll talk to you a little bit about Ignite. We're kind of a unique company in the breadth of what we do in the philanthropy space, but our overall vision is to maximize the power of giving. And we kind of saw how we do that as really being the connector between the people, the ideas, and the capital that is needed to make those ideas happen or to fuel those community solutions. And we also realized that if we were going to be true to this bigger vision and mission that we have, that just being a fundraising organization or just working with operating nonprofits or just working with foundations or philanthropists on their charitable giving, that we couldn't really get to see the kind of change that we wanted to see. And that's really what I'll come back to the slide before, really birthed this idea of what is now a company that kind of has two divisions. One, we work with private foundations to support their grant making process. So a lot of the criteria around nonprofits applying for our clients, we handle a lot of the kind of screening and communication with the nonprofit organizations. And then we help the boards of the foundations that we manage make those decisions around what they will invest in. So kind of managing the grant making process and the decisioning and strategy for foundations primarily, but some just individual philanthropists not necessarily connected to foundations. And then the other side of our business, which was really that start with Music Hall, is primarily helping organizations create the strategies to do really ambitious projects. So ranging from a new detox center for the Center for Addiction Treatment to Music Hall to the Art Museum and the Art Climb and a lot of the big capital projects they're undertaking right now, to the Carnegie in Northern Kentucky is a good example of a much smaller but still kind of ambitious organization that we've supported. But we both help them with the strategy to do that, but we actually staff and manage those campaigns. So our team will kind of plug in as an appendage to the organization for a 2 to 3 year period and really be the staff that is helping to move forward those kind of big community initiatives. And so we have kind of this interesting lens of kind of seeing how dollars are changing hands and how the kind of that Venn diagram of like how the funder and the fundee kind of together make solve problems in the community or make bold ideas happen. Just going back to the company itself, we're now we have our leadership team. Teresa and Tara run our two divisions, but we're about 20 full-time staff folks right now, and we have a board of advisors that really guides kind of the overall direction for our company, and also helps to kind of launch some new initiatives of our own. Kind of a mix of folks that are philanthropic leaders, philanthropists, and individuals that have held kind of senior roles within nonprofits as well. So that's kind of who's overseeing us and kind of helping us to guide the path with our company. maybe to just kind of talk a little bit about kind of what we do and maybe some of our clients, just to maybe make it a little bit more tangible, because it can be kind of an ethereal space to be in. That's hard to, maybe put your finger on. In the nonprofit services division, which is the division that works with the nonprofit that raised the dollars, we've been able to secure over 300 million in raised dollars for the various projects we've worked with for a little over 60 clients in the last 8 years. And we've been able to, be part of and help secure over $100 million plus commitments to various projects in the community as well. So interesting, probably a whole nother lecture on what you learn in that space of most, I would say most of the work that we're doing are gifts, securing gifts from potential funders and funders of $25,000 to just recently a $15 million gift. So it's a little bit different than the annual fundraising work that a lot of organizations do, but most of our projects are in the range of between 10 and $50 million. A few above that, like the Art Museum campaign of about 65 million. So in order to get to those kind of numbers, needs to be real, significant support behind those organizations. Happy to talk more about that too a little bit later on. This is just a little bit of the clients that we have currently. So we are taking kind of that top tranche of organizations through a planning process and working with us at various stages of putting big ideas together. And then the campaigns that we're actively running right now are in that bottom section. So again, kind of a fair amount of arts, but also, from Women Helping Women to Free Store Food Bank and Main Street Ventures, lots of kind of variety of different organizations as well that we work with. It's just the past one. We can go into that. Philanthropic Services. So this is the division that works with corporate and family foundations, and the total dollars, when you look at the portfolio of clients that we work with, is just over $6 million a year that's being invested in this region, that are kind of the purpose and scope of our work is to help those organizations invest those dollars each year in hopefully the most effective way that we can. That equates to a little over 500 grants, and usually like high 300s, a low 400 actual agencies that are funded through the clients that we work with, and we're touching pretty much all of those applications and helping those trustees kind of screen those and make decisions about them. And then kind of the median grant that our clients are giving out ends up being about $25,000 per grant. So this is just a list of some of the foundations that we work with. Again, kind of a mix of, from Scripps Howard Foundation, which is the Scripps Howard company, so it's a corporate foundation, to the Mayerson Foundation is a great example of a private foundation, still very much led and run by the family members as well. And so what's interesting too is that some foundations, the original source of the wealth, so the family, are no longer involved, and that they're more recruited or kind of professional, like family attorneys or folks that were close to the family are now kind of carrying forward that vision. Or like Doctors Foundation is a good example of a foundation that was established to really help recruit diverse doctors to the region. And so lots of physicians on it. It's not a family foundation. It was a purposed foundation that raised dollars from a couple sources that now kind of carries forward their vision going forward. So that is the fairly quick overview of kind of what we do. Probably lots of questions about kind of what all that means. But maybe one thing, what's interesting is our team is, we see philanthropy like any other marketplace, capital markets or anything you consider a marketplace. There's as we look at philanthropy, we see the organizations and the operating nonprofits as the doers. So these are the leaders, the ideas, the people that are going to hopefully solve the problems, meet the needs in the community. And on the other side are those that are of the marketplace, or those that are looking to invest their charitable dollars in those organizations to have that impact in the community, or see that change in the community. And our organization, kind of sitting on both sides of that marketplace in many ways, just has, what we're trying to do is use that knowledge and use that data that we see working with both philanthropists and nonprofits to try to understand how we improve that marketplace. How do you make it more efficient? How do you make the impact greater? How do you get dollars to flow easier and cheaper? Just like other markets, how do you make an efficient marketplace happen? But some of the things that we've seen, as I was just kind of reflecting and thinking about, since I started the company and kind of in this unique role, what are some things that I think are just really important to maybe understand kind of at a macro level when you're looking at maybe the marketplace as a whole. One, this idea that it takes a village, that even the most maybe the wealthiest and most significant private foundations, individuals, philanthropists in the community don't have enough money to even come close to solving whatever challenge that they're trying to benefit, or most of the ideas that are created that they would invest in. That from a funding perspective, a lot of the big initiatives in the community have to be both public and private funded. They require multiple supporters to come together to make it happen, and certainly take a lot of other stakeholders to deliver the change or deliver the services that you're hoping to provide. And we've just seen that when, maybe a neophyte or a new person's mistake in philanthropy is thinking that that one person can create that change or that solution alone. And it's often a wake-up call, particularly for, many people that have acquired significant wealth and then find themselves in the philanthropy space. In many ways, we're in very much control of their destiny in creating their companies, or how they made the wealth. And they often realize when they get in the complicated space of philanthropy, just how collaborative it needs to be successful. And, a great example, I would say, at the national level was, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. I forget the number, but it was north of $100 million invested in New Jersey school system, believing that for over $100 million investment, he was going to create this amazing change. And he even admits, and their foundation admits, that it was a huge failure because they thought they had the answer, they were going to fund it, and that, everything was going to change. And that ecosystem of the public school system was so complicated, and the challenge was much deeper and more significant than what you could size up in making that investment, that it really, I think in his words, was a complete waste of money. Now, it'd be nice to be able to throw 100 million at something and chalk it up to to being new at it. But
I think it proves the point that even if you're one of the wealthiest individuals or one of the largest foundations in the world, these are complex challenges that require, you know, many people kind of joining hands and moving these ideas forward. The other one is, which I think is kind of a similar theme too, is that, you know, this applies, I think, on both sides of the marketplace, in that, you know, what we've seen in both initiatives and ideas or solutions that have been huge successes, how that success was created can be linked back to the leader's ability to kind of co-create the plan, the solution. You know, the ultimate execution of the idea was co-created with the key stakeholders, and that I'll use the music hall as an example, where I was actually, that when we got the music hall contract, we were actually brought in after another firm was fired, and music hall at the time had been working on how to do the renovation, raise the money for the renovation for about almost a decade. But at that exact moment, there was about $9 million in debt and about $2 million in pledges. And so they were completely underwater. And Otto Buddig, a wonderful philanthropist here in the community, was chairing that effort. And Otto and I started going around and meeting with a lot of the key leaders in the community. And after we got done with those conversations, I was like, Otto, we're in trouble, because all the arts supporters, you know, the big classic art supporters, are saying, listen, we're tapped out because we're funding the organizations that are in music hall. We're funding the symphony, we're funding the opera, we're funding the ballet. Like, we can't renovate a $150 million renovation of music hall alone. We just don't have the resources to do that. Then all the non-arts people were saying, well, the arts people got a ton of money. Like, why don't they just do it themselves? And so, you know, that I would say more, you know, broader, like philanthropists that are giving health and human services, or even like big companies like P&G, they're looking at it saying like, well, why do you need my help? You should have the resources. You know, these are wealthy arts organizations who should be able to figure it out. And ultimately what we said is, like, because we have everybody pointing at each other, if we don't figure out a way to come together to solve this solution, you know, solve this challenge for the community, then it's not going to happen. And the other thing we realized too is that, you know, right down the street, driving down Ezra Charles, at the end of Ezra Charles is the museum center and Union Terminal. And Union Terminal was in the same situation, where they had almost a $300 million renovation and no strategy to get there at the moment. And so we did something that seemed entirely insane at the time, which was we put the two together and we formed a kind of a blue ribbon committee. Bob McDonald, who was the CEO of P&G at the time, chaired it. And we got all the people that were pointing fingers at each other on this committee and said, okay, we don't just have a iconic you know, music hall that is in huge need of repair, that is an eyesore, you know, in the over the Rhine community at the time was just kind of beginning to be revitalized. And then we have another iconic institution, and really kind of called the question. They said, we've been talking about these two buildings for 20 years and nothing's happened. Are we going to bulldoze them, or are we going to figure it out? And it was really that calling that question and the debate that ensued that really got it to the Save Our Icons campaign, which was the public campaign to get the levy dollars, the public dollars in the equation, and ultimately, you know, led to the path for both of those projects to do the private fundraising. And it went from not being able to raise anything to we raised about $40 million in 3 months, because all of the key people that that could write checks to make it happen were in the room, and they decided to move it forward. So it was just a matter of figuring out what everybody was going to do. and putting that money together. And ultimately it needed to raise a lot more than that, but it gave the momentum that was needed to move it forward. So it's a great example of like co-creating that solution with the folks that can make it happen. We talk about that a lot in the fundraising space too. It's like, you can't create something in a vacuum and then try to go out and sell it to a funder. If you're looking to them to be a partner, then you need to treat them like that. And you need to get them in the room, and they need to be part of the solution, not just the ATM kind of to make it happen. And we see that happen a lot. The other key thing that I would say, and this is maybe the heart of our business, so I'm a little bit sensitive to it, is it's really easy to get a lot of people together and talk about how you want to solve problems. It's exceedingly difficult to figure out how to execute on those. And so, one key thing about, any funder, any community leader, anyone that's looking to make, substantial change in the community is creating the execution strategy that can deliver that solution or that idea is just as important, I would say, if not more important than the idea itself. Because going through that exercise to say, how do you mobilize this? How do you activate this? How do you make this happen in the way that you're envisioning it? Also allows you to understand all the roadblocks and to create a solution that will have a much higher likelihood of success. And I think it's really easy to get a lot of powerful people in a room and say how important child poverty is, or other key issues in our community. And we've struggled as a community, like others have, in really turning that talk into action. And that action requires just as much care and investment than the ideas. And we often forget that, and we often don't put enough resources behind that as well. And that's something we're advocating for and trying to be clear for folks that are looking to make this change, that you got to invest in the resources to be able to do that, not just the end idea or the end building you're trying to build. The other thing that I would say, and this is more on the grant making side of our organization, is you don't have to be $100 million nonprofit like the Free Store Food Bank to, even though those organizations do amazing work in their own right, there's a lot of organizations that should be small and nimble to be achieving the impact that they're having. And I think one of the big mistakes that I would say, business, someone that's really focused on, traditional business will make the mistake of thinking growth is good for the nonprofit sector. And nonprofit sector is very different than the business sector in that sometimes a niche solution or a small organization is going to be a lot more effective at the work they're doing than trying to scale and grow something, that inevitably might not be serving the purpose for which it was originally created. So I think this is more of just a watch out of like really asking the question of, should we be rewarding and investing in, nimble, in essence, small agencies that are highly effective, both from a cost perspective and in terms of who they're serving. I think it's easy to overlook that, and it's something to consider and kind of keep in mind as you're looking at, who you should be invested in to see the kind of change that you want to see in the community. And then I would say the last thing, and we have I think a really interesting lens into this is, it's one thing to cut checks and to support nonprofits or support causes. It's another thing to step up and lead. And our community, you can trace back all the amazing things that have happened in our community or the successes that we've had. It came back to the leadership, that someone stepped forward and leveraged their influence. Someone stepped forward and leveraged their resources. Someone stepped forward and leveraged their knowledge to drive to a solution. And just being, I kind of see like the true definition of philanthropy is not just your check you're writing, it's the leadership that you are exerting and the energy that you're putting into making change in the community. And that is, it is a rare skill. I mean, even when I look among a lot of the big, philanthropic players in the community, I can name probably only 5 or 6 of them, probably out of the 30 top funders that really take that principle to be core to their own thoughts, to step up, like the Otto Buddings and, even the David Taylors of P&G are really good examples of that. Like they have no incentive to do that. They are stepping up and leading it because they know that's how you really affect change. It's not just your wealth that's going to do that. So I think that's just important to remember, and also important to celebrate people that the majority of this sector is run on volunteerism, that people aren't getting paid to be making this happen. In many instances, they're not only getting paid, they're investing a lot of their own money and their time to make things happen. And I think just making sure we celebrate that and nurture that as a community is really important. You can look at some of these folks and say they don't need a lot of pats on the back because they got a lot of money and they're in powerful positions, but there's nothing stopping them from saying, I can go do something else. And so I think it's just important to realize that. And that's at all levels too. I mean, there's amazing, what I would consider philanthropists that are not wealthy, that have made a lot of important things happen in the community. So it's not just about the wealth. Again, it's the leadership. So that's, I would say, the prepared remarks section. I'm happy to field questions, or Megan or Mark, if you wanted to drive me down a different path here, I'm happy to expound a little bit more on any topic you have.
I wanted to say you couldn't have really wrapped up any better. I know that Mark's recording this so that other of the Mayerson philanthropy classes can benefit from your remarks, but my class is an honors class. We're honors 101, so they're freshmen, but our particular learning communities, what we call it, ours is about, it is about, leadership. And we're looking at leadership in the, from different perspectives. We're looking at it from corporate social responsibility perspective, the political leadership and its influence on, community civic, but also, civic leadership, but also philanthropy. So, we're starting, at that base of philanthropy. So the way you wrap this up and how you pulled that in and talked about the, the influence and leadership, and also just your remarks across the spectrum, from the start, just showing how complex this process is. It's not the simple thing that a lot of people might often think that it is. So I think it's very insightful, and I hope that their little wheels are turning. So I'm not in the classroom to watch their faces, so I don't know, but I nominated Will, since he was the first to log in, that he could put questions in the chat.
Oh no, well, you've
poor Will. But if the class, and I encourage them to ask questions, so I'm hoping that while I was rambling, that maybe they've got some. So Will has asked, how do clients go about reaching out to Ignite to start a partnership?
Well, I would say, I'll maybe say typically how people get connected to us. So we typically, an organization will start thinking, and I'll just think on our fundraising side of our business, a organization will start thinking about a big idea. Like, we were involved in the first year of the Blink festival. And so, when the idea started churning, and then the discussion usually goes to like, okay, so how are we going to make this happen? And that's typically when someone would connect with us. And I would say we a lot of, hopefully we're known among a lot of both philanthropists in town and the nonprofit leaders. But typically it's like a board member of a nonprofit, as part of these discussions about trying to grow the organization that knows us and would make that connection, kind of reach out and say, hey, I think you ought to connect with Ignite and kind of learn about what they do and kind of what they've been involved in. And then we kind of assess whether it's kind of the right fit for the type of work that we do. On the philanthropy side, what's interesting is we're referred usually through professional advisors, so accountants and attorneys and financial advisors for individuals that are high net worth, that might be opening up a foundation or starting a foundation, and then we would get connected with that person or family to then talk to them about helping them kind of get all of that set up. And we often say, like, we're like all the not fun stuff about philanthropy, so that the philanthropists can actually have fun, making that change in the community and giving those dollars out. So we try to, make sure all of the mechanism and support and the strategy is there, and they get to interact with the organizations the way they like, get to serve on their boards, get to give the dollars and see the impact. So that's typically how we're big word of mouth. And I'd also say we try to share as much knowledge as we can. So, doing webinars and other things for the nonprofit sector is often how we're getting connected to folks as well.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm hoping they'll come up with some other questions while they are thinking. So bringing us back to like the leadership concept, I've written all these kind of random notes down here from things that you said, but I put complex leadership. I mean, it's complex. It's very complex, especially because it's collaborative. And you have to recognize and work with so many different stakeholders to bring in the support from across the community. So what is the biggest challenge in being able to effectively doing that? When you have lots of like-minded individuals, kind of on the bus, so to speak, you can imagine it going very smoothly, but I'm sure that doesn't always happen. So just curious, what do you find the most challenging part of leadership in this type of a role or in the nonprofit world?
Percussion or percussion?
Percussion.
Thank you.
We got a percussion question coming up, I guess. So I would say that the most.
Yeah, it's not me.
Yeah, the most. At least you weren't trashing me like when you're off mute. That's
Right,
good.
they just figured out they weren't muted. That been
Yeah.
great laughter. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing you realize in this space is, and this is, I would say, the world in general, but people do things for their reasons, not yours. And that is particularly true in this space because so many people aren't getting direct benefit. In many ways, in the for-profit space, you can get to consensus a lot faster with a lot less emotion because people have the common goal of making money. So if you're going to invest in something, you're looking at the numbers and deciding, do I believe in this person and am I going to get the kind of return that I want to get? Or, anything that's related to someone getting a direct benefit from it, the decision-making process is very different. In the philanthropy space, there are a lot of competing interests and there's very little sticks that can be used and a lot more carrots that need to be used. So I'd say the most difficult thing is not going through that process. Like, we understand that and we build our methodology knowing that things need to move at the pace they need to move to get people on board and aligned. what is most challenging is coaching and allowing people that might be new to the space or spending very little time in this space to understand why it's like that. And I can't tell you how many fundraising projects we start where the board is like really upset with us because they're like, why is this taking so long? You know, can't we go out and start fundraising? And we're saying like, no, we have to socialize this with some top folks. We got to, like, there's a lot of consensus building that is required to get people to decision point to invest money for no benefit. And so I would say the most challenging thing is bringing your leaders of whatever effort you're working on, you know, bringing them to the point that they really, the light bulb goes off and they kind of understand the complexity of this and have patience with, you know, taking the right steps to get things done. I'm just looking at a couple of these questions. What is the most difficult? Well, that I think this kind of partially answers that. And I would say that one of the challenges, this is more of a tactical answer to that, particularly with working with nonprofits, is we're the client. You know, we might be working with an executive director of a nonprofit, but that executive director is having to bring along their team that works for them on an ambitious path, which often is going to require a lot of change to make these big ideas happen. And then kind of going up the food chain, they're having to bring along their board and are having to field and manage, you know, all of their volunteer leaders and their opinions. And we're often caught in the middle. Like we're trying to think several steps ahead to say, if we make this decision, we need to help the executive director, you know, make sure that that's on the agenda for the next board meeting so that their board is aligned and they don't hear about it out in the community. So there's a lot of kind of puzzle pieces to really manage change, because you know, whenever you're trying to do something big and ambitious, the reason why it hasn't been done before is because you have to do something different. And so it's inherently, you know, probably the best for the work that we do, you know, reading books about, you know, like Who Moved My Cheese and other like business books around change are probably the best thing as a starting point to kind of understand some of the kind of psychological, you know, challenges to moving some of these things forward. A question about your music experience, percussion. So I'll maybe answer that in a little bit different way. So I started off playing drums. And I did that because my stepfather, who's now passed, my father passed away and remarried when I was I'm 9, and so my stepfather was very close to me as well, and he played the drums, and so I started playing the drums. But he actually took me to, I grew up in just south of Albany, New York, in a fairly rural, I want to say fairly, it was rural community. And he took me to the Albany Symphony for a concert, and we got dressed up and went, and that was like one of those kind of life-changing experiences where I like saw all the percussion. I think for anybody that's a classical music geek, like Scheherazade is a kind of a famous piece. It's got a lot of percussion in it, and so I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I was 9 years old. I was like, I want to take lessons to be a percussionist. So that kind of took me on a path. I ended up going to the Eastman School of Music, which is a conservatory for music, and really early part of my life was like, I wanted to be a professional musician. The interesting thing that related to the work that we do now is what I realized in being a performer and a composer is that particularly around performance, you know, when you start and you look at a piece of music, it's a bunch of black notes on a page. and you might be able to sight read through some of it, but it really doesn't make any sense to you. Like when you first look at it, like even if you're a good sight reader, you can't get the nuance of kind of how to play that music. It's over time that you start putting these puzzle pieces and experimenting, like you're speeding it up, you're slowing it down, you're like that whole practice routine to learn a piece, ultimately memorize it, and then perform it in front of somebody is a very, to me, that trained me to create strategy. Like you're often looking at something that is very hard. A lot of the answers are not on the surface. You have to really dig, and you got to make mistakes, and you kind of have to, you got to work through it. It's not something that's created with a stroke of brilliance. And if it is, it's going to be wrong. It's really a process. Strategy is a live being that you need to keep feeding because it will change. There's a lot of maxims in the military about like, your plan is thrown out, as soon as the first shot goes off. And that's totally true with a lot of these big efforts. Like you plan that so-and-so is going to give you a $15 million gift, and you realize they're going to give you, $100,000, and you're like, well, this isn't going to work. And so you either throw the project out, you go back to the drawing board, and you kind of figure it out. But I feel like that really prepared me, because there was also an element of, there's a high criticism too in being a trained musician, is like you're always having people critiquing your work. I mean, that's how you really learn. And so you also get used to that. You get used to, for someone that doesn't get a lot of criticism, someone that doesn't get a lot of feedback, it can be very frustrating and off-putting. But a musician really trained me to understand the value of that, and to not get bent out of shape about it, but to really utilize it and allow it to play to your advantage. So I think there's a lot there that, like, when people say like, do you have like a finance degree or something to do the work you're doing? And I was like, no, I would not change one thing. I feel like that classical background gave me a ton of tools that would be incredibly difficult to teach in a classroom, and came over thousands of hours of kind of practice in a completely different way. How do you choose the organization to work with? That's an awesome question, because I think any good company also knows how to turn down business where they're not going to be effective, or you're not going to be able to make the numbers work to allow you to fuel the organization the way you need it to be successful. And what we've really realized on the fundraising side of our business is, we're hiring a pretty senior person. Like, when most of the people that we're hiring are a very specific skill set, and are, even if they're young in their career, they're very accomplished in the work that they're doing. And that comes at a price tag. And what we realize is, if we're going to deliver the kind of work and the kind of brain power that we believe is needed to solve some of these really complex challenges, that you have to make the numbers work, meaning you need projects that are going to be significant enough that they're going to be able to pay those fees, and it still makes sense, for the project. So for us, it's really hard on the campaign fundraising side for us to do something that's less than $3 million, because we also feel like we don't want a inferior team working on any project. Like, if you're working with Ignite, you want to have the same quality, whether you're working with me or you're working with some of the other key people in the organization. And so we've been really good at also knowing, other consultants and companies that we can refer to when it's not the right fit for us. And it's not just about cost. I mean, we've fired clients that are really big, significant organizations, because we just weren't aligning on the methodology. And, this idea of co-creation, some people just can't get their head around it. And that's not the way we do it. So we know our principles. We have to believe in our methodology and it for it to be successful. And so there is this always balance of you know, I would say changing your approach to meet the culture and the people and the dynamics of any given project. But there's certain things we just won't move on because we feel like they're so core to what has allowed us to be successful and the projects to be successful that we just won't deviate from them. So I think we have articulated that internally and in our calls when we're like looking at working with new clients or you know, continuing on with clients, we have that conversation of like, hey, is this in the sweet spot and someone we should be, you know, that we believe we really can help for those reasons. Great question.
All right, guys, we have a few more minutes. Anybody else have any questions for him? We tapped out your brains on questions. Looks like it. They're not saying anything, right? They've forgotten that they're muted, but.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. All quiet on the Western Front. All righty then.
It was a history major.
All right.
Yeah, that's interestingly enough, we're working with the Freedom Center right now as one of our clients, and John Pepper's you know, a huge advocate of the Freedom Center, has been instrumental in getting them up and running. And John Pepper and Ed Rigo are chairing a campaign that we're working on now. And it's interesting. I'll have to find that talk, but he's one of those people that I was talking about, like who steps up and provides leadership in the community, not just like passive resources. And I think he's a great example of someone that you know, in his retirement, he's committed, and even way before that, has committed himself to public service, and is just, you know, an exceptional leader. And that's interesting that he had more of he's, by the way, that does not surprise me, because you have to watch with John, because he'll read everything that you write. He's an avid reader, and he'll write back like 4-page emails, which sometimes I have to take a deep breath because I'm like ADD and I'm like the complete opposite. But it makes sense that he has that background because he's super articulate and a great writer too. Oh, great. Thanks for.
I was going to say, Mark or someone has asked you a private question because we weren't quite following, but I get it now.
I'm sorry.
No,
Mark, Mark, yeah, he sent me, he just did that to everyone. Sorry, you're probably wondering what the heck. It was a direct message, but Mark just sent the link. John Pepper, who's the former CEO of P&G, he just made a comment saying, that's interesting about the more liberal arts background and how that informs your leadership style. And he sent that, like, yeah, perfect. So now everybody can see it.
Now everybody can see it.
You're
yeah.
probably like, what the
Sorry
heck
about that.
That's okay. Well, then he messaged me, he goes, I hacked your class. I'm like, just share the question with everybody, but that's okay. The other thing I was just going to say is, so I don't know, you had your slides up, but I have 2 screens, but I was just so excited when you were doing that. The students, I don't know if they could see me or not, but I mean, I teach in the Honors College, but I also teach in organizational leadership, and we're not in the College of Business. We're in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so we are always drawing those connections to the humanities and to the arts, and how important those things are for building your well-rounded education, and how transferable those skills are to what we do in our everyday lives. And I was like, you were doing all of this unprompted, and this is so awesome to listen to your life path. So thank you for sharing that. You know, it's like I kept cheering periodically as you were talking because I was like, I promise you students, he was not prompted or scripted. That all just came straight from the heart. So, but I'm looking at Mark's question now. So now it all makes sense too.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
sorry that I went down the John.
No,
Patton
that's
path
totally
without
okay.
anybody
Totally.
knowing it. Well, it's, for, it's interesting that, maybe to just emphasize that point too, that, a lot of the leader, I mean, one of the benefits of being in the philanthropy space is you get to, and this has been this way through my career, I feel like I've had access to some of the most, kind of sought after and brilliant business and kind of community and political minds out there. And I always realized that that honor that I had to be in that role, and would always be a sponge as to listening to and kind of observing how these leaders operate in their space, and kind of understanding who's effective and who isn't. And I do believe, I mean, I often find there's a very interesting thread of really diverse kind of backgrounds are often leading to very accomplished leadership abilities. And I think it does come back to a lot of, I think, people that are drawn to liberal arts or drawn to arts or some of the more creative fields. There's a learning, there's an interest in learning, and maybe a philosophy view on the world too, that allows you to take in a lot of information and ask questions about it. And I think people that ask a lot of questions and contemplate their actions are often a lot stronger leaders, and are comfortable with a lot of viewpoints, and just being cognizant of a leadership role being, how do you maximize and bring together those thoughts into a better thought that everybody can be behind. And so there's, I think there's a lot of undervaluing of that kind of education versus the more, some of the more technical careers, because even like the world's best engineers and attorneys that I see have some of those creative aspects, because they're able to see things other people can't and put those dots together, not just practice a technical skill that's been taught. Well, it will be nice, post-pandemic, to see like actually stand in front of a class in the future again. Should be nice.
We're getting closer.
Yeah.
But it's like the students, we're also so excited to have face-to-face classes this year, having some face-to-face classes, and we're masked up and we're all doing it right. And then I get sick. So it's like, bless their hearts. I said, I let them vote. Do you want to continue this way with me being a giant talking head in front of the room, and you continue to gather? And they're all like, yeah, we'll do it. Sure. So they've been great, but I'll be back next week. I see that you're unmuted, Will. Do you have new questions or?
We just wanted to say thank you.
So
you're welcome. That's awesome.
Thank you. That was great. Good job, guys.
Yeah, great questions.
Well, I want to thank you again. This is just perfect, absolutely perfect for us. One of the things I promised them in the description is that try to bring thought leaders from each of these different kind of quadrants of leadership that influence our society. Our focus is on leadership and society and from these different areas, like I said. And so when Mark sent out that message about you, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is very perfect. So thank you. Yes, Will, you may leave now. You are dismissed, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
That's
But
fine.
thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and Mark, thanks for making that connection.
Oh, appreciate you doing it. Will of the people. So, yeah.
So
Okay.
I greatly appreciate it. And I told Mark I was a little nervous. I was a little nervous because I knew I was going to be connecting from home and they were going to be connecting from the classroom.
Yeah.
But I should have known. I could rely on them. They did a great job. But thank you again. And thanks for letting Mark record it so that others can benefit from it. And because the students have actually already asked me that as well. Because I know they're going to be writing a